Gentlemen, I am really excited about this video panel, which is entitled The Impact of Digital Media on Business. Equally as exciting is we are in Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles. Fabrizio is on the East Coast in Pennsylvania. And our special guest from close to Beijing, China, is Philip Beck. And it's great to have you both here.
Nice to be.
Why don't we start with some brief introductions about who you are and your business and what you do, and we'll start by the farthest. Philip, if you can start and let us know.
Philip Beck. I'm an angel investor in China, in mainly tech startups here. I've been doing that for about 5 years. Prior to that, most of my life was spent in advertising agencies on the media side, working with almost every single client across every single consumer category, helping them position and market their product to their end consumer. And through all of that was the first one to set up a digital media agency in Australia back in the mid-90s, when we had a lot of fun buying keywords for our clients, through to setting up a digital media operation in China for the Publicis Group. So that's been most of my career, with a few years on the side running publicly listed recruitment companies.
Great, thanks. Fabrizio.
I come from originally the hospitality industry, spent between a couple of different major firms, about 12 years with cruise lines, and then with Club Med. I then took a small career segue. I went into commodities, of all things, which was very exciting, working internationally with Mexico, Middle East, and in Europe. Then, by fate or by design, I decided to start more proactively structuring my consulting services. And I formed a firm several years back with a couple of other individuals, and our approach was to basically offer the three prongs of services that companies need, whether they're startups or established, which was marketing, strategy, business consulting services, operational consulting and restructuring, and quite a bit of private banking work as well. And that evolved through a lot of different projects, working from Walmart to technology startups to consumer goods. It's been very, very interesting. And over the course of the last 5 years, I've been working with two different firms in the capacity of both founder and sort of like an advisor, focusing mostly on B2B sectors with sort of like a dovetail B2C aspect to them. So a lot of my work has been done in sort of trying to merge the corporate side of the house with the marketing side of the house with the outside world that has changed and continues to change faster than they can keep up with it. And part of it has been on the marketing side, and the other part has been on the technology side.
Cool. Well, we should get some pretty good insights here. I'm just a lot simpler than you guys. We just have an executive search practice that finds a talent for all those companies that are trying to do something, basically. So, and from that, it's kind of interesting, and I'm really excited about some of the answers here, because I constantly, Fabrizio, you talk about things changing a lot, and Philip, you've been from the recruitment to techs to investing in techs, and we first met in China when I was working with this video company and trying to do a whole recruitment thing with video resumes, etc. And the big thing I always see, especially with small growing companies, even medium sized, but even the big corps, is leaders are overwhelmed and talk about good timing. Look at the Sony thing right now with media and whatnot, but they're overwhelmed with the amount of alternatives, the amount of different technologies, the amount of different digital new media that they've got to, somehow understand, keep up with. And as I may have told you, I had a discussion once with, not so long ago, with somebody saying, he used to be able to have a meeting with his staff in his office, get things handled heart to heart, and go for it. Now he says he has a meeting, and before everybody's out of the office, it's on Twitter. basically. So talk to me, Philip, if you can start a little bit, because you've got from the recruitment to text, etc. Digital media has changed the enterprise, it's changed the world, it has a major impact not only on business, but on the decisions that leaders make or don't make in their business. What's your thoughts overall about that?
I think the key thing that I see in all the businesses I deal with and some of the corporates I work with is that a lot of leaders still feel like they want to be in control. And the key thing that you've got to understand with the digital world is that effectively brands have lost control over their brand. You know, the consumer is very definitely in control now, and the consumer responds and acts much more quickly than what most leaders can cope with in their business. So I believe, you know, they've got to change the way that they work from trying to lead and control to creating a framework within which, you know, they can guide and help consumers. But this trying to remain in control all the time, it's just not going to happen. They're going to get overwhelmed and not really focus on some of the key issues that are out there. And I also see many companies, at least half of the top companies in China, and that includes foreign companies, really have no digital media strategy at all. You know, they have bits and pieces, but they have no focused, coordinated effort across this whole myriad of what's out there in the market.
Well, that's kind of scary. Fab, in your experience, you know, internationally as well, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I definitely agree, and I'm in line with what Philip says. And I also think that, I have experienced, and I have worked with companies that are having such a hard, truly a hard time trying to break away from the status quo, the way things have always been, and they think that they're being progressive. And in the process of trying to be progressive, they're actually behaving more as if they were regressive, because they often, and Philip, I don't know if you've seen this happen, they go into complete analysis paralysis because they are so absolutely shell-shocked when I'm talking about, you know, when they basically open the blinds and they're like, Twitter, Vine, Vimeo, YouTube, Google, Yahoo, Bing, bang, boom. And then okay, I'm going to close the little blind, and then we're going to go hire a consultant who's going to tell us everything that's out there. Problem is that the consultant is already outdated himself or herself most of the time.
Absolutely.
And then by the time that they have a plan in place, it's like consumer electronics when they come out. They're already 18 months old. That's something that is just, it's absolutely fascinating and terrifying to actually see unfold with a lot of our clients. I mean, Mark, even with some of our peers or friends, people that you and I speak in common and so on and so forth. The other thing that also is I think it's very telling of how different the world is I believe it was no more than 2 years ago, Deloitte came out with a study that they've spent about 3 years putting together, and they were talking about the topple rate of leaders in particular verticals or industries. So the rule of thumb used to be that once you were in the top echelon and the top 1%, you generally had a company generally had the ability to stay there 5, possibly up to 10 years. And they studied all of these different industries, not just in the United States, but also globally. And they basically came to what to me is still, a terrifying statistic to me, okay? Which is the fact that the topple rate now, the average, I'm top dog, is no longer this 5-year or 10-year period. It's 18 months on average. So, it's almost like, leadership in a sector or in an industry, it's almost reaching the same levels as the popularity of a new restaurant in New York City. That if you don't make it within the first 16 weeks, you might as well just close the doors, because that's the only chance that you get. So really, media and technology folded together really have completely torn apart the fabric of business, and leadership just can't keep up with it.
Well, let me continue on that thread with you, Philip, and especially with related to your recruitment, your investment, etc., technology background. Initially I remember, not to age myself, but executives of businesses used to tell their people, you can't get on the internet while you're working. Absolutely not. And the first thing that happens, obviously, if you tell somebody not to think about a pink elephant, is all they can think about is a pink elephant. So they're wondering how to get on it. And then people like Michael Dell, very successful, waited a long time before he even realized he had to respond to what was being said on the internet about Dell. And what I've found with companies now is smart management is engaging with their employees to engage on the internet, and they get better branding from it, and people and management responds to people on the internet, because if they don't, they think there's something wrong. How do you see two things here, that management cannot be overwhelmed and somehow understand what resources they should use? Like Fabrizio said, there's bing bang boom of all these different ones. What do you use, and how do you use it properly? Especially if you're a small business, like you said, the new tech startups, where there's only so much time and money they've got.
Yep.
How do you take advantage of all these things without getting overwhelmed?
So some of the things that can be done, because you're right, a manager can't control it. So what a manager should be doing is looking at how they can create I'll call them a brand disciple of each and every one of their employees, and give them suggestions, a framework, ideas on how they can communicate to the outside world, because the world is looking at everybody within the organization. Somebody on LinkedIn could say something negative about a company, and then others will start to follow it. So the best thing they can do is to do to look at what they can do to help their employees, their customers, everybody that's out there, be a brand ambassador for them. And there's going to be some, I'll call them terrorists, that will try and bring down a business with negative comments and things like that, and that will happen. And companies need to respond to those negative comments or negative sentiment, because it's what their customer thinks and believes. But collectively, so instead of a top-down approach, management have to think more collectively these days than they ever did before.
No, that makes a lot of sense. When you're advising your clients, Fabrizio, about what digital media, social media to use, how do you decide which ones, or all, or whatever?
Prior to actually deciding which media to use and what to recommend to them, I always pose to them sort of like a scenario / question. And Philip, I'd love to get your take on this. Is the fact that first of all, they have to just basically give up and understand that, as Philip started out saying, they're no longer in control. The consumer is in control. That's the first point, that they collectively have to like take their blinders off. The second thing that they have to come to terms with, the second and third thing that they have to come to terms with, is that the corporate structure with all of these boundaries that are both evident, unwritten and existent, sort of like go away, because the corporation has to really act as one voice, unified, as a single front, because you're being attacked. It's sort of like circle the wagons, because the Indians are surrounding you. It's not that you're being attacked, but you're being bombarded as a brand, as a company, from so many different angles, that it really has to be a cohesive, sort of like all-inclusive, voice that's fairly singular in tone and attitude and platitude and so on and so forth. And the third thing that I always tell them is that they have to get comfortable with being naked and being honest. And those are two things that senior management really does not do very comfortably, because they have to. Senior management has to all of a sudden now do customer service, because they will have one person that just goes off on a rampage on Twitter, and then that becomes viral, and it's just circled the earth like the explosion of the Krakatoa volcano. And it's a guy with a little BlackBerry that they just pissed off. Okay, and they have to be able to deal with that single individual, as well as, legions of followers behind that single individual, and they have to, be humble. They have to be, literally be naked and say, mea culpa. This is what you see, and what can we do to fix it? If they can put their arms around that, then that dictates, at least from my experience, what channels they can embrace and they can adopt to communicate to the outside world. They can do Twitter. They can do
and I want to ask about that. Sorry to interrupt, because that's a great point. And you both have international experience. Does that vary? Start with you, Philip. Does that vary in different countries, different cultures? That ability to do that?
No, I don't believe so. I totally agree with what Fabrizio said. They've got to get naked. They've got to just be open, and the key thing that I've recognized in the international markets I've worked in is for a company to understand that they're now part of a community. We always talked about that in traditional media days, but it's even more so now. And for companies to understand which digital community do they belong to, and who are their key influences out there. And in all communities, people like to have a sense of belonging. And if their community is disrupted in any way, they're going to get pissed off. And that's where, like Fabrizio said, management's just got to get naked and accept it. And the other challenge for a lot of companies is their board of directors, who are even more out of touch with what's going on. You can't run a business month to month or as often as a board meeting happens. It's just that way of managing things is just not as appropriate as what it was. They can only give guidance, and oftentimes many boards are not even aware of or not even using some of the digital media themselves. So I don't see any major differences across countries. It's the community that's most important. Fabrizio?
And that gives me a good segue. We can start on this, Fabrizio, I was going to ask about board of directors, because we do a lot of board work, and there's a lot of diversity now happening in boards, from age-wise to gender-wise to expertise to everything. A lot of CEOs, they're strategic, but they're in the day-to-day, and they look to their boards more often now than ever to give them some future vision, including in what to do for digital media. But you're saying, Philip, that a lot of them, and I agree, aren't even in it. In fact, they're looking for board members to bring that expertise to them. So, Fab, how does a board operate effectively where they're advising and bringing the expertise of digital media to the table for any size company?
Ideally, it should basically start by throwing out everything it has done up to that particular moment when they decide that they have to start behaving effectively and building for the future. And I'm not saying throw away governance. I'm not saying throw away some of the processes. What I'm referring to, which goes back to what I was saying before, is the fact that boundaries. They have to understand that boundaries are redefined. They have to understand that truths are redefined. They have to understand that all boards by nature are run on an agenda that's cloak and dagger, because they're the board. Okay, and more often than not, and it's happening more and more and more, a lot of boards are actually reacting and having to address, what's happening in the court of public opinion by their consumers and their constituents. So it's a complete shift in the mindset, okay? And it's also their responsibility to understand that they have to include, instead of being exclusive as a board, they have to be inclusive, okay, of a different type of talent that's going to help them steer, towards this terrifying, naked, honest future that we're all going to be a part of. It's no longer, the days of Randolph Hearst, where he had enough muscle that, he would publish enough stories in newspapers, and he would basically topple governments and change economies. Murdoch's been trying to do it, but slowly but surely he's losing the grip on that as well. And that's the thing that we always have to change.
Well, how does that work in China? How does that work in China, Philip?
No, you can't do that.
Can you do
You
that
can
in China?
influence the government, and there's lots of examples in digital media where the people have spoken out about a particular issue, and the government's responded. And that's everything from earthquakes to politicians taking bribes. It's quite open.
So where do you see, kind of concluding a little bit, because it's a long topic and we might have to have the sequel after this sometime, but where do you see the future of digital media? Let's start with Fab this time. Where do you see the future?
The future is wow. The thing that comes to mind when you ask that, and it's a topic that I've discussed quite often, is pretty much like the first step of any recovery program, which is the fact that you have to admit that you're powerless. We as a society, we as executives, we as corporations are fundamentally powerless to digital media because of its ubiquity, its instantaneity, and the fact that it's at the fingertips of our consumers, our constituents. And what it's doing is that it's bridging, the mythical digital divide and breaking down all barriers. That's that's the way that I see it, and it's almost a utopian world of transparency when it comes to communication and even relationships and touch points. That's my point of view.
And Philip, your point of view too, especially considering that you're always looking at tech businesses right now to potentially invest in. Where do you see the future?
Touch points. I think that's one of the key things for anyone to look at, because the pace at which things are happening is insane. I don't know what it's like in the US, but here in China, it feels like 7 years worth of activity happens in one. So to try and keep up with that, it's just impossible. And to try and assess everything that's out there, also difficult. But one of the key things that Fabrizio touched on is, what are the touch points? And that's where I think a company can look at, through whatever the decision process is, or purchase decision process for a customer, what are the most effective touch points that we should try and have some influence over or be guiding people through? Because you can't cover everything. Recently, we did an assessment in the e-commerce space, and what are the consideration points for a consumer in purchasing something online. In China at the moment, there's more than 120 very popular digital channels that a consumer could go to assess what they're going to buy before they buy. And they have different influences on the consumer along the way, as well as what their friends are saying. Because I think one of the most powerful things that digital media has enabled around the world, and it's really strong here in China, is word of mouth. Word of mouth has always been the most powerful recommendation that someone can give to a product or service. And digital media has just given power of word of mouth to the consumer. And that's what scares a lot of companies. It's like, oh my goodness, there's all these people out there now talking about my product. And Fabrizio said quite well at the beginning of his opening, companies have just got to abandon what they've done before and just take a fresh look. So in the tech space, I think the iPhone is 6 years old now, 7 years old.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and even pretend to guess what's going to happen in the next 7 years. I'm watching with a lot of sort of hope, that what will come out in terms of augmented reality and virtual reality, with Oculus Rift devices and other wearable devices, it's going to be super interesting to see how that will make the world even more instantaneous, which is what, another point that Fabrizio touched on before.
Well, what's
that's what we
interesting,
need, more instantaneous.
If I touch on one thing real quick, is the fact that, how technology is actually evolving and decreasing the distance between thought to the outside world to distribution. It used to be word of mouth, became word of mouse, okay, through bloggers, then word of click through sharing, and now, now if you look at, for example, at the iPhone, you don't even have to do anything. Siri, post to Facebook, post to Twitter, done. All you have to do is basically put your thumb on something. I mean, I can just imagine the day that you have, maybe with the famous Apple Watch, that you go like this, and it translates your thought, okay, and next thing you know, you have a device that's actually able to bridge the greatest computer on Earth to the rest of the Earth. And it's just scary, exciting.
Well, aside from the difference in ears, you're basically talking like Mr. Spock right now. So on Star Trek, so that's where we're definitely heading. And I do have my new iPhone 6 that has my fingerprint thing on it there. But I'll end it with one thing. You guys have been fantastic, and one thing I hear in my business, obviously, is that it's going to go back to always being about people, no matter what. And talent acquisition is picking up big time again, and who knows? I don't know. You guys have seen the Cisco holographs. Maybe we'll be interviewing each other by a holograph soon. We'll be standing right beside each other talking. So it's a fascinating world. And one other person told me a while back, they said, if you figure TV was invented, let's say 1950, the last 64 years, kind of like you were saying, Philip, has gone unbelievably fast in what has been invented. What he was saying was, what happened in the previous 2,000 years? What were they doing, for God's sakes? Geez. So great topic. I really appreciate you guys participating and your insights, your perspectives, and obviously your friendship. So with that, have a happy, healthy holiday and New Year.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you, Mark. Bye,
Cheers,
Philip.
Thanks, and we will speak to you both again real soon.